At 1:17 in the morning, Laura Hayes stood barefoot in the hallway, listening to the silence. The house was dark. Beyond the closed bedroom door, Adrian was asleep, or at least Laura hoped he was. She held her breath and looked down at the small bag beside her feet. It was almost empty. Inside were identification, cash, medication, a charger, and her hidden phone. That was all she needed. She had once believed Adrian's intensity meant he loved her. He wanted to know where she was and who she spoke to. He called it devotion and protection. When Laura refused intimacy, he treated her refusal like betrayal, turning affection into arguments, guilt, and pressure until she no longer knew whether saying no was safe. Laura had stopped sleeping deeply. She listened for footsteps and watched his expression before answering. She hid ordinary things because Adrian could turn anything into evidence. Tonight, something inside her had finally become still. Her phone vibrated once. Laura nearly dropped it. She looked at the screen. A message waited from Megan. The words were simple. "The door is unlocked. Come whenever you're ready. I'll be awake." Laura stared at the message. She slipped the phone into her pocket and lifted the bag. Before reaching the back door, Laura stopped outside the bedroom. The door was slightly open, revealing Adrian's silhouette. Then came the other memories. The accusations, the monitoring, the apologies that never changed anything. Laura realized she had spent months trying to save the marriage. Tonight, she understood the truth. There was nothing left to save. She was saving herself. She opened the back door. Cold air touched her face. Laura stepped outside and walked toward her car. Her hands shook as she searched for the keys. When the engine finally started, she did not look back. For the first time in months, Laura allowed herself to breathe. She drove through sleeping streets, gripping the steering wheel. She believed it was over. Behind her, the house remained dark. 20 minutes later, Adrian opened his eyes. He reached across the bed. Laura's side was cold. He sat up. Adrian simply stared at the empty space beside him. Then he walked downstairs. The kitchen was untouched. The back door was unlocked. Her wedding ring was still on the counter. Adrian studied it. Then very slowly he smiled. In the quiet house, he whispered one sentence. "She'll come back." 3 years earlier, before Laura knew what fear would feel like inside her own home, she had met Adrian at a friend's birthday dinner. He was charming in a way that made people lean closer when he spoke. He remembered small details, opened doors, listened carefully, and made Laura feel as though the crowded restaurant contained only the two of them. Their relationship moved quickly. Adrian called every morning. He wanted to know how she slept, what she had planned, and when he could see her again. Laura found the attention flattering. When he became jealous, she mistook it for devotion. "If I didn't care, I wouldn't worry about losing you," he told her once. Laura believed him. Within months, they were engaged. The wedding was beautiful, intimate, and full of promises. Laura entered marriage believing she had found a man who would always protect her. The first changes were almost invisible. Adrian started asking to see her phone. First, he framed it as a joke. "Why are you hiding it?" "I'm not hiding anything." "Then let me see." Laura would laugh and hand it over. Soon he stopped asking. He began checking messages while she showered, questioning unfamiliar numbers, and remembering conversations she had forgotten mentioning. If Laura met a friend after work, Adrian wanted to know exactly where they had gone, what they had discussed, and why the meeting had taken so long. His questions slowly became interrogations. Then came her friendships. One evening, Laura mentioned meeting Megan for coffee. Adrian's expression changed. "She doesn't like me. She barely knows you. She knows enough." Laura tried to dismiss it, but Adrian continued until she canceled the meeting. Afterward, he apologized. He brought flowers home and held her close, promising that he only reacted because he loved her too much. That became the pattern. Affection, pressure, guilt, apology, then repetition. The most difficult changes involved intimacy. Adrian began treating Laura's boundaries as personal rejection. When she said she was tired or uncomfortable, he accused her of withholding affection. "You used to want me," he would say. "I still love you. I just need you to respect what I'm saying." His face would harden. "So now I'm the problem?" Laura learned that disagreement always carried a price. She became quieter. She stopped explaining herself. And slowly, she started documenting what she was too frightened to say aloud. Hidden inside an old storage box beneath winter clothes, Laura kept a small notebook. She wrote dates, arguments, messages, and moments she feared she might later convince herself were not serious. She never wrote Adrian's name on the cover. One night, after another argument, Laura locked herself in the bathroom and opened the notebook. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "I don't recognize the man I married anymore." She closed the journal, wiped her eyes, and listened. Footsteps stopped outside the door. Then Adrian knocked. "Laura?" She said nothing. His voice softened. "Come out. I just want to talk." Laura stared at the notebook in her lap. She thought about all the evenings she had spent convincing herself that tomorrow would be different. She had mistaken temporary tenderness for change and silence for peace. Now the notebook felt less like a diary and more like evidence. She was beginning to understand why leaving would require more courage than staying had. And somewhere beyond that bathroom door, Adrian was already beginning to realize that his wife was no longer as easy to control as she had once been. The footsteps eventually moved away from the bathroom door, but Laura remained inside for several minutes. She waited until she could no longer hear Adrian before unlocking the door. The notebook disappeared beneath her clothes again, and with it went another piece of the life she had once believed was normal. 2 days later, Laura met Megan Foster at a quiet cafe across town. Megan knew something was wrong before Laura said a word. Her old friend had always been expressive, quick to laugh and quicker to complain about ordinary frustrations. Now she barely touched her coffee. Her eyes kept moving toward the entrance. "You look scared," Megan said. Laura tried to smile. "I'm just tired." Megan shook her head. "No, this is different." The question broke something inside Laura. She told Megan everything. Not all at once, but slowly. She described Adrian's constant questions, his jealousy, his demands, the way arguments somehow became Laura's fault. She admitted that she had stopped seeing friends because every invitation created another confrontation at home. Megan listened in silence. When Laura finally finished, Megan looked stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought I could fix it. And now?" Laura looked down. "I don't think I can." Megan reached across the table and took her hand. "You can stay with me." Laura immediately shook her head. "If he finds out, then we'll deal with that. But you don't have to go back there alone." For the first time in months, Laura felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Choice. Megan urged her to keep documenting everything. Save messages. Write down dates. Photograph anything important. Keep copies somewhere Adrian could never find them. Laura promised she would. For several days afterward, Adrian seemed different. He brought Laura breakfast. He complimented her clothes. He apologized without being asked. "I know I've made mistakes," he said one evening. "I'm going to change." Laura stared at him. "You've said that before. This time I mean it." His voice was gentle. For one dangerous moment, Laura wanted to believe him. Then, late one night, Adrian left his computer open in the study. Laura had never searched through it before, but something compelled her to look. She found folders containing photographs of places she had visited alone. A coffee shop, Megan's neighborhood, her workplace. There were screenshots of her social media, copies of messages, and notes recording times she had left the house. Laura's stomach tightened. This was not jealousy anymore. It was surveillance. She heard a floorboard creak and quickly closed the computer. Back in the bedroom, she waited until Adrian was asleep before taking out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed Megan's name. "I need your help. I'm leaving." Megan replied almost immediately. "Then we'll make sure you get out safely." Laura stared at those words in the darkness. For the first time, escape was no longer an impossible thought. It was a plan. They agreed not to discuss the plan by phone unless absolutely necessary. Megan would find a place where Adrian could not search for Laura, while Laura would gather things she could carry without attracting attention. Her identification, medication, cash, charger, and phone became the items she separated from her belongings. The next morning, Adrian behaved as though nothing had changed. He kissed Laura goodbye before leaving for work. She watched his car disappear through the window. Only then did she realize how she had begun studying every movement he made. She was now no longer waiting for him to change. She was waiting for the right moment to disappear alone. 3 nights after Laura decided to leave, Adrian found the first crack in her plan. It happened because of a mistake so small that Laura almost missed it. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. When she returned, Adrian was standing beside it. "You've been talking to someone," he said. Laura stopped. "What? Don't lie to me." His voice was quiet, which frightened her more than shouting. He held up the phone. "There are deleted messages." Laura felt her heartbeat rise. "Give it back." Adrian did not move. "Who is she?" Laura said nothing. "Megan." The name landed between them like a door slamming shut. Laura understood immediately. Somehow, he had discovered the one person who had helped her. "She is my friend. She is filling your head with lies." "No, she's helping me." Adrian's expression changed. "Helping you do what?" Laura stared at him. She knew that answering would reveal everything. So she said nothing. That silence enraged him. He paced through the kitchen, then turned suddenly. "Where are you planning to go?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "You think I'm stupid?" "No." "Then tell me where you're going." Laura's voice trembled, but she kept her eyes on him. "Somewhere away from you." For seconds, Adrian stared. Then his anger disappeared. His shoulders lowered, and his voice became almost pleading. "Laura, please." She had seen this version of him before. The wounded husband, the desperate man who promised that everything would change. "I can be better," he said. "I swear." "You've promised that." "I mean it this time." "You always mean it until you don't." Adrian stepped closer. "Nobody will ever love you the way I do." Laura felt tears gathering in her eyes. "That isn't love." He looked confused. "What is it, then?" Laura finally said what she had been too afraid to say for years. "It feels like fear." The words silenced the room. For once, Laura did not rush to soften what she had said. She did not apologize for hurting his feelings. She stood there, realizing that speaking the truth felt different from surviving an argument. Adrian's face hardened. For a moment, Laura thought he might hurt her. Instead, he stepped backward. "You'll regret this." Then he walked away. There had been no physical violence, but Laura knew something had changed. The man who had once apologized after losing control now seemed capable of imagining a life without forgiveness. Later that night, Adrian sat alone in the dark living room. His phone vibrated. One message. "Leave Laura alone." He stared at the screen. A second message followed. "She deserves a life without you." The number was unfamiliar, but Adrian thought of Megan. His jaw tightened. He began searching through Laura's old messages, social media accounts, and contacts. He wanted to know everything about the person helping his wife. He did not sleep. He opened drawers, checked receipts, and searched places where Laura had kept things. He was not looking for proof that she had betrayed him. He was looking for proof that she intended to escape. That distinction frightened Laura. He was no longer trying to understand her. He was trying to find her destination before she could reach it. Laura watched from the bedroom doorway. She saw the glow of his phone against his face and understood that the escape could no longer wait. After Adrian went upstairs, Laura entered the kitchen. The house was quiet. She removed her wedding ring. For a long moment, she held it, remembering the woman she had been when Adrian placed it on her finger. Then she set it on the kitchen table. She did not leave a note. She did not cry. The ring felt heavy, as though it carried every promise she had made and every promise Adrian had broken. Leaving it behind felt like admitting that the marriage was already over, even if the danger was not. She walked back upstairs and began preparing the bag that would carry her into the darkness. By morning, Laura intended to be gone. Laura intended to be gone by morning, and for once, her decision did not change when fear arrived. At 4:38 a.m., she woke before the alarm. The house was completely silent. Adrian was asleep upstairs, his breathing slow and heavy. Laura remained still for several seconds, listening carefully. Then she slipped from bed and reached for the bag she had prepared. She moved through the house without turning on a single light. Her identification was inside the smallest pocket. Cash was folded beneath her medication. Her charger and phone were tucked beside a clean shirt. Nothing else mattered. She left behind photographs, jewelry, clothes, gifts, and every object that might slow her down. At the kitchen table, her wedding ring remained exactly where she had placed it. Laura looked at it once. Then she opened the back door. The cold morning air touched her face, and she stepped outside. Her hands shook as she unlocked the car. For one terrible second, she imagined Adrian appearing behind her. He didn't. Laura started the engine. The headlights cut across the empty driveway, and she drove away. She did not know exactly what would happen next. Megan had arranged a temporary place where Laura could stay until they decided on something safer. It was not a permanent solution. It was not a new life. But it was somewhere Adrian could not reach her immediately. That was enough. For the first time in years, Laura drove without checking the clock or explaining where she was going. She passed dark houses, closed shops, and empty intersections. As the sky slowly brightened, something unfamiliar settled inside her. Freedom. It was fragile and frightening, but it was there. An hour later, Laura pulled into a roadside restaurant. She needed coffee. Inside, strangers sat around small tables, talking about ordinary things. A couple laughed over breakfast. A father tried to entertain his sleepy child. Two truck drivers argued playfully about football. Laura sat alone beside a window. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and watched them. Nothing was happening. That was what moved her. Nobody was checking her phone. Nobody was demanding explanations. Nobody was watching her expression. For years, she had believed her life was difficult because marriage was difficult. Sitting there among strangers, she finally understood something more painful. Her life had not been normal. She had simply become accustomed to abnormality. Across town, Adrian woke shortly after 6. He reached across the bed. Cold sheets. His eyes opened. He sat up and listened. Laura? No answer. He walked downstairs. The wedding ring on the kitchen table caught his attention immediately. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked around the room. The back door was unlocked. Her bag was gone. Her coat was gone. Adrian did not panic. He walked to the counter and picked up Laura's phone charger. Then he checked the bedroom, bathroom, closets, and garage. He was reconstructing her departure. He examined the time on the kitchen clock. He checked the car's usual parking position. He opened his computer and reviewed Laura's recent activity. His behavior was methodical. That made it worse. Finally, he remembered the notebook. The old box. Adrian searched beneath the clothes until he found it. He opened the journal. Page after page described him. His words, his demands, his jealousy, his promises, his anger. Laura's handwriting became increasingly desperate. Adrian read the final entry twice. I don't recognize the man I married anymore. His expression remained blank. He closed the notebook. Then he smiled faintly. Meanwhile, Laura arrived at Megan's apartment shortly after sunrise. Megan opened the door and pulled her into a tight embrace. You made it. Laura nodded, suddenly too exhausted to speak. She stepped inside. For several seconds, she simply stood there, absorbing the unfamiliar quiet. Then her phone vibrated. The freedom she felt moments ago suddenly vanished. Unknown number. Laura looked at the screen. One message waited. You can't disappear from me. The color drained from her face. Megan saw the change immediately. What is it? Laura slowly turned the phone toward her. Neither woman spoke. Because somewhere behind them, The life Laura had escaped was already moving toward them. The message remained on Laura's screen long after the room had fallen silent. "You can't disappear from me." Megan read it again, then looked at Laura. "We need to call someone." Laura shook her head immediately. "No police." "Laura, this is exactly why we need them. You don't understand. If Adrian knows I involved the police, he'll come after me." Megan wanted to argue, but the fear in Laura's voice stopped her. Instead, she called someone she trusted, Detective Sarah Bennett. Bennett had spent years investigating domestic violence cases, disappearances, and assaults that began behind closed doors. She had learned that frightened victims rarely told their stories in a straight line. Sometimes they apologized for the person who had hurt them. Sometimes they minimized threats because admitting the truth made the danger feel more real. When Bennett arrived, she did not begin with accusations. She sat across from Laura and asked one question. "What happened?" Laura stared at her hands. "He controlled everything." Slowly, she described Adrian's monitoring, his jealousy, his demands, and the surveillance she had discovered on his computer. She told Bennett about the journal and the threatening message. Then Bennett asked whether Laura had ever been physically assaulted. Laura hesitated. "No, but you were afraid he might hurt you?" "Yes." Bennett nodded. "That matters." Laura looked surprised. "I never thought being afraid was enough." "It is enough to take seriously." Bennett explained that Laura did not have to decide everything that day, but she should preserve every message, photograph, journal entry, and record that could establish a pattern of behavior. "Don't delete anything," Bennett said, "and don't tell Adrian what evidence you have." Laura nodded. For the first time, she felt that someone understood that fear could exist long before visible injuries. Then Bennett asked about the threat Adrian had made during their final argument. Laura looked toward Megan. There was something she had never told her friend. "He said something once." "What did he say?" Laura swallowed. "He said that if I ever left him, he would make sure nobody recognized my life afterward." Megan's face tightened. Bennett remained completely still. "Did he explain what he meant?" "No, but he said it like he had already decided what would happen." Bennett wrote the statement down. "Thank you for telling me." The words sounded simple, but Laura could hear the seriousness behind them. While Bennett continued gathering information, Adrian was creating an entirely different version of reality. He began visiting neighbors. He called relatives. He told anyone who would listen that Laura had vanished without explanation. He appeared exhausted and devastated. One neighbor later told Detective Bennett that Adrian had stood outside his house looking as though he had not slept. He kept saying he just wanted his wife home. Another neighbor described him as concerned, almost heartbroken. But when Bennett reviewed Adrian's statements, something bothered her. He rarely asked the questions a frightened husband should ask. Was Laura safe? Had anyone hurt her? Had she been seen? Instead, Adrian repeatedly asked something else. "Have you found her yet? Do you know where she is? Did the police locate her?" Bennett noticed the difference immediately. A desperate husband wanted to know whether his wife was alive. Adrian seemed more interested in knowing whether the police had discovered her location, and that distinction changed the direction of the investigation. For the first time, Bennett wondered whether Laura had not simply disappeared from Adrian. Perhaps Adrian knew exactly where she had gone. If he did, the question was no longer whether Laura was hiding, but who was hunting her. If he did, the question was no longer whether Laura was hiding, but who was hunting her. By the following evening, Laura had stopped sleeping. Every unfamiliar sound outside Megan's apartment made her sit upright. Cars slowing near the building seemed suspicious. Footsteps in the hallway made her reach instinctively for her phone. Megan tried to reassure her. "He doesn't know where you are." Laura looked toward the window. "I thought that yesterday." The threatening message had changed everything. Laura no longer trusted the apartment, even though she knew Megan had done everything possible to protect her. "I need to move," she said. Megan frowned. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere he won't expect." They considered several possibilities before deciding Laura should stay temporarily with someone outside the neighborhood. It was not ideal, but distance felt safer than waiting for Adrian to find them. Before leaving, Laura called Detective Bennett. "I'm going somewhere else tonight," she explained. Bennett's voice became serious. "Don't travel alone if you can avoid it." "I have to. Then call me when you arrive." Laura hesitated. "I'll meet you tomorrow morning." "Where?" "At your office. 9 o'clock. "Laura, are you sure?" "Yes." It was the last conversation Bennett ever had with her. Laura left Megan's apartment shortly after midnight. She carried her overnight bag and phone, but she left most of her belongings behind. Megan watched from the doorway as Laura walked toward the waiting car. "Call me when you get there," Megan said. "I will." Laura smiled faintly. Then she disappeared into the darkness. Morning came without a call. At 9, Detective Bennett waited in her office. At 9:15, she checked her phone. Nothing. At 9:30, she called Laura. Straight to voicemail. Megan called next. Once, twice, then again. Each call ended unanswered. By noon, concern had become something heavier. Bennett began reconstructing Laura's movements from the previous night. She reviewed traffic information, phone records, security footage, and statements. The timeline raised questions almost immediately. Adrian had told investigators that he had spent the entire evening at home after returning from work. But a camera near a nearby intersection showed his vehicle moving through the area later than he claimed. He also said he had not contacted Laura after her escape. Phone records suggested otherwise. There were several attempted calls from an unfamiliar number connected to Adrian's secondary phone. When Bennett confronted him about the discrepancy, Adrian remained composed. "I was worried about her," he said. "You said you didn't know where she was." "I didn't." "Then why were you calling a number associated with her?" Adrian paused. "I thought she might answer." Bennett watched him carefully. His explanations kept changing, but his confidence did not. Then, late that afternoon, police located Laura's vehicle several miles from the route she had planned to take. It was parked on a quiet roadside, angled awkwardly beside the curb. The driver's door was locked. Laura's phone was inside. His battery was completely dead. Her overnight bag was gone. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, but the scene felt wrong. The discovery sent a quiet urgency through the investigation. Bennett ordered the area preserved and asked officers to search nearby roads, properties, and cameras. Every minute mattered. If Laura had been taken from the vehicle, someone had deliberately removed the evidence that might reveal where she had gone. Bennett finally understood clearly that the case had crossed a line. This was no longer about locating a woman who had chosen to disappear. Laura was now a potentially endangered victim. And somewhere beyond the roadside, the evidence of what happened to her was waiting to be found. The evidence was waiting to be found, but it took 4 days for anyone to discover it. On the 5th morning, a property worker drove beyond the maintained portion of an abandoned industrial site several miles outside town. The area was rarely visited, especially after heavy rain had damaged the access road. He had been checking a fence line when he noticed something unusual near a stand of trees. At first, he thought it was discarded clothing. Then he saw a handbag. He stopped. Something about the scene made him step backward. The worker called the authorities, and within minutes the quiet property became the center of a police response. Detective Sarah Bennett arrived shortly after sunrise. Police lights washed across the darkness as investigators moved carefully through the property. Their voices remained low. Evidence markers appeared one by one across the ground, surrounding scattered belongings that immediately made Bennett's stomach tighten. Laura's identification was there. So was a piece of clothing Megan recognized. And several feet away, investigators found Laura. Bennett stopped at a distance. She did not need to see every detail to understand what had happened. The positioning of Laura's body was deliberate. It was not the careless result of someone attempting to hide a crime. Someone had arranged the scene so that whoever discovered it would understand that the placement itself was meant to communicate something. Bennett looked around the property. The killer had chosen an isolated location, but had not completely concealed the body. That contradiction mattered. If the goal had been simply to hide Laura, there were easier places. Someone wanted her found. Someone wanted the discovery to be remembered. The thought followed Bennett throughout the investigation. Forensic technicians photographed the area while detectives searched for footprints, fibers, digital devices, and anything else that might explain how Laura had arrived there. Her overnight bag was nearby, the same bag she had carried when she left Megan's apartment. But her phone was missing. That detail immediately concerned Bennett. The phone found in Laura's abandoned vehicle had been deliberately left behind, while the bag had traveled with her. Someone had separated the two. Later that afternoon, the medical examiner delivered preliminary findings. Several details contradicted Adrian's account. Adrian had claimed that after Laura left their home, he had no contact with her and no knowledge of where she went. The evidence suggested otherwise. There were injuries and traces indicating that Laura had survived beyond the time Adrian said he believed she had disappeared. The findings did not establish every moment of her final hours, but they weakened his timeline considerably. Bennett returned to the station carrying a sealed box containing Laura's journal. She sat alone beneath the harsh fluorescent lights and opened it carefully. Page after page revealed the private history Laura had been too frightened to speak aloud. Bennett read about Adrian's jealousy, his surveillance, his threats, and the gradual destruction of Laura's confidence. Then she reached the final entry. The handwriting was uneven. The sentence was short. "If something happens to me, look at Adrian." Bennett stared at the words. For several seconds, she heard nothing except the hum of the lights. Laura had written those words before she disappeared. Before the vehicle was found. Before her body was discovered. She had known enough to be afraid of her husband. Now Bennett needed to determine whether Laura had also known exactly what he was capable of. She closed the journal and looked toward the evidence board. Adrian's photograph was already there. For the first time, the investigation had something more powerful than suspicion. It had Laura's own warning. And Bennett was determined to find out what had happened between the moment Laura escaped and the moment someone decided to turn her death into a message. The room seemed colder as she read it again. Laura had not written the sentence for attention, revenge, or sympathy. She had written it because she believed there might come a morning when she could no longer speak for herself. That possibility now weighed heavily on Bennett. Somewhere inside the missing hours was the truth, and every contradiction in Adrian's story had suddenly become significant. More than anything else, the final words in Laura's journal changed the investigation. Until then, Adrian had remained a husband whose story was suspicious but incomplete. Now every detail surrounding him demanded another look. Detective Bennett brought Adrian back for questioning. He arrived wearing the same expression he had shown neighbors since Laura disappeared. Exhausted, concerned, almost fragile. "I just want my wife home," he said. Bennett watched him carefully. "You've told us Laura left voluntarily." "She did. You said you didn't know where she went." "I don't." "And you haven't contacted her since?" Adrian lowered his eyes. "No." His answers were calm, rehearsed, and strangely precise. But the investigation was already moving beyond his words. Technicians recovered deleted messages from Laura's devices. Investigators also found fragments of surveillance footage from cameras Adrian had installed around the house without telling Laura. The recordings showed him monitoring her movements, sometimes following her from room to room, sometimes watching her leave. More disturbing footage appeared later. Adrian had tracked Laura after she escaped. A traffic camera captured his vehicle traveling along a road near the area where Laura had first stopped after leaving the house. Another recording placed his vehicle near Megan's neighborhood. Adrian had claimed he never knew where Laura was. The evidence suggested otherwise. Still, investigators needed more. Megan eventually remembered something Laura had told her during their final conversation. "There was another phone," she said. Bennett looked up. "Are you certain?" Laura said Adrian kept a second phone. She didn't know exactly what he used it for, but she was terrified of it. That information gave investigators a new direction. A warrant was obtained. The second phone was eventually connected to Adrian through records and account information. Its location history placed it near several points associated with Laura's movements after she left the house. Most importantly, it placed the device near the area where Laura's vehicle was abandoned. Bennett stared at the map. The dots formed a trail. Adrian had not been searching blindly. He had been following her. When Bennett confronted him again, his confidence began to crack. "You said you never knew where Laura went." "I didn't." "Then explain why your second phone was near her vehicle." Adrian's expression tightened. "I have no idea." "Explain the surveillance footage." "I was worried about her." "Explain the deleted messages." He said nothing. Bennett placed a photograph on the table. It showed Laura's vehicle. Then she placed another photograph beside it. A time-stamped image showed Adrian's car in the same area. "You told us you had no contact with Laura after she left." "I didn't." "Then why were you there?" Adrian leaned back. "I told you I don't know." Bennett let the silence grow. She knew silence could reveal more than pressure. Finally, she showed him another piece of evidence. It contained details about Laura's final movements that had never been released publicly. Adrian looked at the page. His face changed. Only slightly, but Bennett saw it. "You know what this is," she said. "No. You know where she was." "I already told you." "You knew she stopped at a roadside restaurant before reaching Megan's apartment." Adrian froze. That information had never been shared with the public. Bennett leaned forward. "Only the investigators know that detail." Adrian stared at her. Then, suddenly, his carefully controlled expression disappeared. "Who told you that?" The room went completely still. Bennett did not answer. She simply watched him realize what he had done. Because Adrian had just asked the wrong question. He had not asked how they knew. He had asked who had told them. And Detective Bennett understood why. He already knew the detail was true. The question itself was an admission. For the first time since Laura's disappearance, Adrian looked genuinely frightened. Not because the police suspected him, because they were finally getting close to what he had tried to hide. And his mask finally fell. Adrian's question had exposed the weakness in his story. From that moment, Detective Bennett stopped treating each piece of evidence as an isolated clue. She began fitting them together. The deleted messages connected to the second phone. The surveillance footage placed Adrian near Laura's movements. Traffic cameras established his vehicle's route. Witnesses remembered seeing him near the roadside restaurant. Forensic findings placed Laura's final hours later than Adrian had claimed. And then there was the journal. Laura's words gave the evidence something no digital record could provide. Context. She had not been afraid of Adrian because of one argument. She had been afraid because control had become the language of their marriage. Adrian had followed Laura after she escaped. The reason became clear through his messages and search history. He had been looking for her location, not because he believed she was in danger, but because he could not accept that she had chosen a life without him. To Adrian, Laura's departure was not a decision. It was defiance. He believed she belonged to him. That belief had shaped everything. On the night Laura left Megan's apartment, Adrian's second phone showed movement toward the same general area where her vehicle was later discovered. Investigators reconstructed the route using cameras, cellular records, and witness accounts. Laura had driven away believing she was finally beyond his reach. Adrian had followed. At some point, he confronted her. The exact conversation could never be recovered, but Laura's journal and Adrian's messages revealed the emotional pattern. He wanted her to return. She refused. He promised to change. She told him it was too late. He accused her of destroying their marriage. She told him the marriage had already destroyed her. Those words mattered because Adrian's behavior afterward showed that he had interpreted rejection as humiliation. Laura had escaped his control, and he could not tolerate it. The confrontation became fatal. Investigators found no evidence that Laura had planned to meet Adrian or voluntarily returned with him. Instead, the evidence showed that he had located her and pursued her after she had clearly attempted to disappear. After Laura died, Adrian began constructing a second story. He wanted everyone to believe she had vanished voluntarily. He presented himself as the abandoned husband. He repeated the same questions to neighbors, relatives, and police. He emphasized her supposed independence while quietly concealing the surveillance, the second phone, and his pursuit. Then he created confusion around the crime scene. The deliberate positioning of Laura's body was not random. It suggested an attempt to shock investigators and create uncertainty about motive. Her belongings were scattered, while important evidence was removed or separated from her vehicle. But Adrian had misunderstood something. Creating confusion was not the same as erasing evidence. Every action left another trail. Detective Bennett spent hours reconstructing Laura's final journey. At the beginning, Laura had been driving towards safety. She had stopped for coffee. She had contacted Megan. She had planned to meet Bennett the following morning. Then Adrian appeared. The timeline showed Laura's movement becoming increasingly constrained until the evidence abruptly stopped. Bennett placed the final photographs across the investigation board. Laura's escape route, the roadside restaurant, the abandoned vehicle, the isolated property, Adrian's vehicle, the second phone, the journal. Everything led back to the same conclusion. Laura had not simply disappeared. She had been hunted. And Adrian's motive was more disturbing than jealousy alone. He wanted control. He had spent years convincing Laura that his obsession was love. When she finally rejected that idea, he could not accept the loss of power. His possessiveness had become entitlement, and entitlement had become violence. Bennett understood the difference. This was not a husband overwhelmed by sudden heartbreak. This was a man who believed his wife had no right to choose freedom. When Laura exercised that right, Adrian treated her decision as something he was entitled to punish. For years, he had mistaken obedience for love, silence for forgiveness, and fear for devotion. Laura's final escape exposed that lie permanently for everyone who knew him. The case had started as a search for a missing woman. Now it had become the reconstruction of a murder. A woman had escaped a life built around fear. A man had followed her because he could not accept that she was free. And Detective Bennett knew the next step would not be finding the truth. It would be proving it in a courtroom. The evidence was ready. Now Adrian would have to face it. The evidence was ready, and now Adrian had to face it. He was arrested 3 days later. There was no confession. Adrian stood in his kitchen while officers read the charges. For the first time, the man who had controlled every conversation had nothing left to control. The courtroom became the final stage. The prosecution built Laura's final days piece by piece. Her escape, her calls to Megan, her planned meeting with Detective Bennett, the abandoned vehicle, the second phone, the surveillance footage. Then came the journal. Laura's words were read aloud, without exaggeration. They described a woman who had spent years adapting herself to survive inside a marriage that had become a prison. Megan testified next. She told the jury how Laura's voice changed whenever Adrian's name was mentioned. She described the fear behind Laura's decision to leave and the message that appeared after she reached the apartment. "I thought getting her away from him was enough," Megan said. "I didn't know he would follow her." Detective Bennett explained how minor details exposed Adrian's lies. A deleted message, a second phone, a vehicle caught on camera, a false timeline, a question Adrian should never have asked. Each piece had seemed small by itself. Together, they exposed the story he had constructed. The defense argued that Adrian had suffered an emotional breakdown after Laura left. His attorneys described him as obsessed and devastated. But the prosecution showed that his actions went beyond grief. He had monitored Laura. He had ignored her boundaries. He had tracked her after she escaped. And after her death, he had attempted to control the story. The jury deliberated for hours. When the verdict was read, Adrian was found guilty. Megan closed her eyes. She felt relief, but it was not happiness. A conviction could answer who had killed Laura. It could never answer why nobody had recognized the danger sooner. Afterward, Megan struggled with guilt. She replayed every conversation, wondering whether she could have insisted Laura stay or called the police sooner. Detective Bennett told her something she would remember. You helped her leave. What happened after that was not your fault. Bennett had seen too many victims spend years learning to survive before anyone understood the danger. Leaving was often described as freedom, but sometimes it was the moment when control became most threatened. Months later, Laura's journal was returned to Megan. One evening, she opened it. Near the final pages, she found an unfinished sentence. One day, I want to wake up and know that my life belongs to me. Megan stopped reading. Laura never received that morning, but she had tried to reach it. Her decision to leave exposed everything Adrian had spent years hiding. The control, surveillance, threats, and obsession disguised as love. Laura's life ended before freedom could become hers, but her truth survived. And sometimes the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship is not when a victim decides to stay. It is when she finally decides to leave.